There are some who claim that the Iranians and the Russians just didn't feel like it was worth fighting for Bashar al-Assad anymore. I disagree with that. I think that they would have fought if they had the capability. This is a key ally of both Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and of the Russians since the Soviet time, right? So you don't give up so easily on the crown jewel of your influence in the Mediterranean for the Iranians and for the Russians. But as we've been saying, this comes at a time when Russia is occupied with the war in Ukraine and has had to shift some of its resources there from Syria to Ukraine. And is not able to assist Bashar al-Assad the way it did in 2015, which was, a big military intervention and required constant fighter jets dropping bombs across rebel-held areas, including on hospitals, which is a pattern we're seeing also in Ukraine. And then for the Iranians...
And which happened again in Syria, by the way.
Absolutely.
Russian warplane just in the last 2 weeks. Yeah.
Absolutely. And which to me indicated when they, instead of striking the rebel advances, they started striking civilian targets. It struck me as a sign that they were not prepared for this and they weren't quite sure what the battle plan was going to be. And when Aleppo fell, Aleppo was a huge battle back when it fell first to the rebels and then the regime retook it. It just demands a huge amount of military hardware and planning and battle and blood. So I just don't think the Russians were able to get together and organize as quickly anymore. And then on the Iranian side, again, I don't think they were ready to give up on Bashar al-Assad and said, okay, sure, yeah, we'll walk away. They're spinning it now as though they thought that it was the best thing for the Syrian people, that no more blood should be shed and that Bashar al-Assad should withdraw and accede to the will of the people. Very magnanimous of them to say that when that's not how they rule in their own country. But I think it's a reflection of Iran's current vulnerability, the fact that it has stretched itself too thin over the last decade or so, from Yemen to Iraq to Lebanon to Syria, that its investments in this axis of resistance, as they like to call it, are crumbling. But they would have preferred, I'm sure, to keep their relationship with Syria under Bashar al-Assad, a relationship that goes back to 1979 and the foundation of the Islamic Republic and the rule of Hafiz al-Assad. So the Iranians and the Russians have lost a key element of their Middle East strategy. That's not to say they won't find a way to come back, but right now it's not looking good for both of them.
So going forward, Iran is the country, after Syria, that's losing the most influence here. They're losing their axis of resistance, which hardly seems to merit the branding at this point. Where do they go? Is this a question of they have no choice but to try to engage with their adversaries, or does this push them faster towards a nuclear weapons program, or both?
Probably both. They will threaten that they will accelerate their nuclear program, but they want to engage, I think, with the outside world, and they hope that that can guarantee regime survival, because Iran is going through so much change at the moment. It is also going to go through a transition. It's already had the transition from one president to another very quickly this year. The supreme leader is aging and looking to see how he can ensure the transition to a new supreme leader, or at least ensure the survival of the Islamic Republic. That's a lot to manage at the same time. And meanwhile, they look incredibly vulnerable and exposed to Israeli military action. And they've also lost so much of what they thought they had built over the last 4 decades. When October 7th happened, I wrote a piece in The Atlantic saying that this was, in essence, the end of Iran's strategy of proxy militias around the region, because they had suddenly found themselves faced with the limitations of such a strategy, which they used to keep the enemy far away from their borders, the enemy being Israel and the United States. And suddenly they were risking being drawn straight into the fight, and they realized they wouldn't be able to use these proxies anymore the way they had over the last 4 decades. And this is where we are. But Iran also wants to be accepted by the international community. They were very stung in 1990, 1991, when they were not invited to the Madrid peace conference, even though they had done everything the West asked of them, including push for the release of Western hostages in Lebanon. And so they're looking for this kind of acceptance and guarantees of survival of the regime. But that's also up to the Iranian people.